So the first one is Tariff Policy Overview. The Trump-era tariff on steel and aluminium introduced in 2018 were designed to protect US industries but significantly impact North America by increasing costs and disrupting trade flow. This section outlined the nature and extent of those tariffs and their effect on the local economy. So basically in 2018, the US imposed tariff on steel and on aluminium imports to protect domestic industries and address the trade deficit, but despite being close trade partners under NAFTA, Canada and Mexico were hit hardest. This tariff disrupted deeply integrated supply chains across North America, causing higher costs, delays, and uncertainty for many businesses. In retaliation, Canada and Mexico imposed their own tariffs on key US exports like agriculture products, escalating trade tensions and harming industries on all sides. The resulting conflict exposed weaknesses in NAFTA's dispute resolution and modernization, ultimately leading to its replacement by the USMCA in 2020, which aimed to update trade rules, strengthen protections, and restore more stable economic relations among the three countries. Next, tariff rates, target sectors, and the timeline of implementation. So in March 2018, the United States government imposed tariff on 25% on import steel and 10% on aluminium from most countries, citing national security concerns under Section 232. Initially, Canada and Mexico, two of the US closest trading partners, were temporarily exempted from this tariff. However, the tariff immediately affected key industries such as automotive manufacturing and construction, where steel and aluminium are critical inputs, causing concern over rising costs and supply chain disruption. After that, in the 1st June of 2018, the US administration abruptly ended the exemptions for Canada and Mexico, extending the steel and aluminium tariff to imports from these countries as well. This decision marked a significant escalation in trade tensions with its North American neighbor. In retaliation, both Canada and Mexico imposed their own tariff on a range of US exports, targeting products like cheese, pork, and whiskey. These reciprocal measures increase economic uncertainty and strain long-standing trade relationships.
Okay, so lastly, on May 17, 2019, after extensive negotiations, the United States, Canada, and Mexico agreed to remove the steel and aluminium tariffs as part of their broader agreement to replace NAFTA with the new United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. The removal of tariffs helped to ease trade tensions and restored more predictable and stable conditions for business and consumers across all three countries. This development was seen as a critical step towards strengthening North American economic cooperation and modernizing trade rules for the 21st century. Next is rationale behind the US policy towards North America. The first one is security and stability. The US wants to keep North America safe from threats like war, terrorism, or external attacks. By working closely with Canada and Mexico on security matters, the US ensures the region stays peaceful. This protects its citizens, economy, and infrastructure from any dangers that could spread into the country. Second one, economic interests. Agreements like NAFTA, now called the USMCA, make trade easier between the US, Canada, and Mexico. This supports American businesses, farmers, and consumers by lowering costs, creating jobs, and ensuring access to important resources and markets. The third one is regional leadership. Having strong policies helps the US lead North America in setting economic and security strategies. This leadership role also stops other powerful countries like China or Russia from gaining influence close to the US borders, which could affect its national interests. Fourth, migration and borders. The US controls immigration to keep its borders secure. At the same time, it works to reduce poverty, violence, and instability in nearby countries like Mexico and Central America. This approach helps manage migration in a legal and orderly way while protecting US national security. Last but not least, environment and resources. The US cooperates with Canada and Mexico to address environmental problems like air and water pollution. It also works together to use shared natural resources such as fisheries and forests responsibly to ensure sustainability for the future.
So for the next one is how the tariffs affected both importing and exporting industries in North America, especially between the US, Canada, and Mexico. First, for importing industries, These are exports going into the US from countries like Canada and Mexico. The US imposed tariffs on goods like steel, aluminium, and car parts. Because of the higher price, demand for these goods dropped in the US. Mexican agricultural exporters faced delays and uncertainty. Canadian steel companies saw losses and slower production. As a result, these businesses had to change their supply chains and find new markets outside the US. Now for exporting industries, this refers to goods the US exports to Canada and Mexico. In response, Canada and Mexico imposed retaliatory tariffs on US products. US goods like farm products, machinery, and processed food became more expensive. This caused higher production costs for businesses that rely on US imports. It also led to supply chain disruptions. In the long run, this contributed to inflation and forced changes in trade agreements. So in short, tariffs didn't just raise prices, they disrupted trade, hurt businesses, and changed how companies operate across North America. The next one is changes in trade volume, trade balance, and supply chain adjustment. The first one is how trade volume changed in North America from 2018 to 2025. In 2018 and 2019, trade volume was quite stable, but in 2020 it dropped sharply. This was mostly due to COVID-19 pandemic, ongoing tariffs, and supply chain disruptions. After that, from 2021 to 2024, trade volume recovered steadily, with 2024 reaching the highest level in the 8-year period. However, in 2025, trade volume collapsed drastically. This was the biggest drop in the whole timeline. So why did this happen? The 2020 drop was caused by the pandemic, trade wars, and broken supply chain. The growth from 2021 to 2024 happened because of economic recovery and the USMCA agreement taking effect. And the 2025 collapse was likely due to new tariffs, global tension, or more supply chain problems. So for the second one is the trade balance in North America between 2018 and 2025. From 2018 to 2024, the region faced a growing trade deficit, meaning imports were much higher than exports. The deficit kept getting worse and peaked in 2024. But in 2025, there was a big improvement. So why did the deficit get worse at first? It started with Trump-era tariffs, and then Canada, Mexico, and the Europe responded with counter-tariffs. COVID-19 also caused serious trade and production disruptions. Key industries like steel, automotive, and agriculture became less competitive. Meanwhile, imports remained high, but exports struggled to keep up. Then in 2025, the situation got better. Why? Some of the tariffs were relaxed. The USMCA agreement was working more effectively. Many companies began reshoring or diversifying their supply chains. And finally, post-COVID recovery helped increase regional trade again. So, overall, trade policies and global events had a big impact on the trade balance, both negatively and positively over the years. For the third one is how supply chains in North America were affected between 2018 and 2025. The combination of Trump-era tariffs and the COVID-19 pandemic caused serious disruptions across supply chain. Ports like Los Angeles and Seattle saw activity drop by 25 to 40%, and US export shipments also fell sharply. Delivery times increased by 15 to 20%, and many companies had to store more inventories, up to 30% more, just to avoid running out of stock. Freight and input costs went up by 10 to 15%, especially in industries using steel, aluminum, and packaging. To manage this problem, many businesses moved production closer to home, either reshoring to the US or nearshoring to Mexico or Canada. This helped lower shipping costs but raised operating expenses due to higher wages and material costs. Some industries were especially impacted. In automotive, a 25% tariffs added about $1.2 billion in extra costs, raising car prices by around $2,000. In Canada, steel and aluminum companies faced tariffs of up to 50%, leading to layoff and financial pressure. Retailers like Nike and Walmart warned they might have to raise prices due to the added costs. Overall, around $34 billion in tariffs affected the economy. Production dropped by 7.3%, prices went up by 1.8%, and delivery delays increased by as much as 21 days. So in short, the tariffs and pandemic led to higher costs, slow production, and forced companies to change how and where they operate.
I will be presenting the different way countries in North America, Central America, and the Caribbean respond to the US tariff imposed in 2025. Let's start with Canada. Canada imposed 25% retaliatory tariff on US import, starting with $30 billion worth of goods and threatening to increase that to $155 billion if the US did not reverse its action. The targeted goods include electric vehicle, electronic, pork, beef, and steel. At the same time, Canada launched a remission system to protect local business and argued that this US action violated the CUSMA agreement. While preparing legal and economic countermeasures, Canada also engaged in bilateral negotiation to resolve the issue. Next, we have Mexico. Mexico also retaliated, but with a more cautious approach. The imposed tariff ranging from 5% to 20% on selected US goods like produce, cheese, metal, and pork. Rather than filing a complaint to the WTO, Mexico focused on diplomatic dialogue under USMCA framework, even proposing a joint task force with the US. Mexico's goal was to defend its interests while keeping a stable trade relationship. In contrast, Central American countries did not impose retaliatory tariff. Instead, they were hit with US reciprocal tariff, 10% for most countries and 18% for Nicaragua, due to political tension. This nation lacked the economic leverage to retaliate, so they prioritized bilateral engagement and legal review under the CAFTA-DR agreement. Their focus was to maintain trade access to the US and avoid escalation. Finally, the Caribbean countries, especially those in CARICOM, also did not retaliate. They were subject to the same US tariff, 10% on most export and up to 38% for Guyana. Instead of retaliation, they emphasized regional unity, called for high-level talk with the US, and promoted economic diversification.
How tariff on North America affect the US economy. So first, increase in price in the consumer level. Tariff impounded the price of imported goods. This meant that the consumer in America were forced to pay high price on ordinary goods and commodities, including food, automobiles, and also household goods. Second, supply chains that are disturbed. A significant number of industries, for example, comprising car manufacturers within the US, rely on the part or those provided by Mexico and Canada. Tariff raised the price and inefficiency in production. Third, revenge of trading partners. Canada and Mexico retaliated by imposing tariff on American products such as pork, cheese, and also apple. This was a blow to the US farmer and also export trader. Fourth, job uncertainty. Other industries were shielded, such as steel, and other industries lost their employment due to low export and also increased cost of production. Last but not least, inflation and decelerate development. Because of increased price of import, there was inflation. Trade uncertainty also weakened business investment to an extent that it slowed economic growth. Impact on US consumer, producer, employment, and also inflation. So first, for consumer, tariff caused price of imported goods to increase. As a result, US consumer had to pay more for daily essential, reducing their purchasing power. Second, for producer, US producer faced higher costs because many raw material came from Mexico and Canada. This made production less efficient and reduced profit margin. Third, for employment, some industries like steel gained jobs due to protection, but others lost jobs, especially in agriculture and manufacturing, due to reduced export and also rising costs. Lastly, for inflation, as import prices increased, overall prices in the US economy rose slightly. This inflation affects both business and also consumer.
There are four broader economic and strategic effects. First one, supply chain shift, where US firms move production closer to home, which is nearshoring to avoid tariff. Mexico gained manufacturing investment. Canada saw boosts in sectors like auto parts. Center market attracted low-cost production, for example, textiles. For second one, stronger regional trade ties. NAFTA was replaced by USMCA 2020, tougher rules, better labor standard. Canada and Mexico diversified trade beyond the US, for example, US agreement. Third one, diplomatic and strategic impact. Tariffs cause tensions, for example, steel and aluminium, leading to retaliation. USMCA renegotiation improve relation. Tariff also used as leverage in immigration talks with Mexico. For last one, competitiveness and resilience. Shift towards self-sufficiency, some domestic gains but higher costs, meets global competitiveness but stronger regional resilience.